Hi, everybody. Good morning. And thank you for joining us today on our first panel of the day for the track that we are on this fantastic summit. Today, our panelists are going to be focusing on culture and the future of work. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge Cloud Silver. And for those of you who are able to be present for her presentation, it was fantastic. And we are going to be echoing many of the sentiments that she shared about culture and community and belonging. And as we get into it, I want to acknowledge today that we have 5 amazing panelists whom are leaders in the field of HR, culture, work, and this space that we're in. So it's an honor to have everyone join us. We're going to have them introducing themselves for about 60 seconds, sharing what they do and how it ties into our topic today. Why don't we go ahead and start with Mike?
Oh, I get to go first. Good morning. Great recap on Claude. She did a fabulous job kicking the day off. And I also want to congratulate everybody that participated yesterday. It was a great day, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. I have been doing work the last 9 months as part of the Humans First Club. And that's a new venture at this stage of my life where we are bringing groups of people together to talk about what can the future look like and how do we get everybody feeling great about their work? How do we fix workplace culture? And that comes on the heels of many years of doing mergers and acquisitions. So over the last 18 years, I've been involved in 5 large mergers and acquisitions where I led large teams in complex business and technology. And it's just truly an honor to be connected with all of you. And I believe now that this is the greatest time of need and opportunity for HR. And I want to dive in and help move that forward however we can. Because there is complexity, there is a lot of change coming, and I believe we need to grow human capacity in our organizations to be able to keep up with that accelerated change. So it's exciting for me to be here, and thank you for having me.
Mary Beth.
Good morning. I work in organizational culture as it relates to narrowing the generational divide. So oftentimes organizations are bringing me in because they feel a disconnect, typically with the younger generation, the millennial generation, and feeling like they want to do something to have a higher level of engagement. And even though folks are usually connecting with me and my company Spark Vision for specifically that purpose for one generation, that's typically what gets me into the organization to talk about, well, what about everyone else? Because if we start creating programs for simply one segment of a population, we actually are polarizing an organization versus bringing it together. So how can we create a culture and an environment where everyone can thrive across the generations and we realize how much more we are alike than different? So as it relates to the workplace, I really get to have beautiful, amazing conversations where we get to get really vulnerable and honest about what the current opportunities are, and then create small and large shifts on really coming together and creating that environment where people want to be.
Thank you. Vanessa.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm in California. It is bright and early. So my work and passion has been around building a community of HR talent and diversity, equity, inclusion professionals, and taking the skill set from design thinking and applying it into how do we solve organizational problems, how do we apply it to improve candidate and employee experience through the lens of being more equitable in our practices and also more effective to actually design for humans. So I think there's been a lot of focus on how do we use technology, how do we leverage data, but where is there the bridge between using all of those data insights to actually implementing something that's valuable for people? And so I think right now we're really looking at how can we not just advocate for the employee base, but for those of us working in a people operations role, how can we help others understand what we do and build bridges back towards us as well? So if you're a people ops person out there who's a little tired of hearing about data and analytics and survey sending, that's really where I love to talk about how can we help people understand what we do, not just change how we do everything we do to be more like other departments, but actually building bridges to us and leveraging our skill set as well.
John.
Hi, everyone.
In the past, jobs were really all about.
Yeah, mine just did that a few minutes ago too. Yes, wonderful to be here. Hello to everyone. I'm a strategic HR OD consultant based in the UK, near Ascot, but working globally. And all of my work is around culture and the future of work. A lot of that from a sort of an HR process and organization design perspective, but do quite a lot of organization development interventions focused on different areas as well. I also do quite a lot of training, fair amount of conference speaking, a little bit of writing. Did a joint article with Dave Ulrich on the future of HR a couple of years ago. So a lot of my work is sort of inside HR as well as looking at HR's impact on the rest of the organization. Most recent book, The Social Organization, not really about culture, although in a sense the whole thing sort of is. So that's describing how organizations in today's environment increasingly can compete on the basis not just of their people, but also the connections, the relationships and the conversations between the people. And again, looking at the range of enablers from HR, organization design, workplace design, organization development, digital technologies, and so on to create that type of environment. And increasingly, a lot of my work is around, particularly at the moment, either creating communities and networks with inside organizations to balance their functional designs, or working with their leadership teams to create more of a community-based approach there as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheryl.
Hello, good morning. So I'm Cheryl Johnson and I'm the Chief HR Officer for Paylocity. We are an HR tech company that focuses on the employee experience and the whole life cycle of the employee. My experience before becoming the Chief HR Officer here, I was also the Chief HR Officer at Global Logistics, which is a third-party logistic brokerage firm. That company had about 72% millennial and was geographically dispersed and had close to about 3,000 employees. So having the experience really managing a very high millennial population, but also looking at the generational divides within an organization, and also working in an organization that had kind of a traditional culture and a lot of historical legacy cultural attributes, and trying to shift into more of a modern culture. And then before that, I worked for companies like Ulta, Sears, and Fossil and Radio Flyer, where culture was a really big part of my responsibility. So I have a lot of experience leading the HR function, but really focused on culture and employee experience.
Thank you. And I'm your moderator, Evangelia Leclerc, and I am a coach, corporate trainer, helping businesses and individuals build careers that fuel life dreams. So a lot, if you've spoken or if you've listened to the presentation that Cloud shared, it's about really tuning into the individual person, understanding what's in their heart and where their strengths are, and ensuring that they're in a space where they can continue to grow through the change while honoring themselves and their dreams. So that turns the tables to you all. Thank you for joining us. I want to encourage each and every one of you, now that you know who our panelists are, to begin to formulate any specific questions and comments. You could post them in the link below that you see, and I will be filtering through those questions as we see fit after a short list of questions that we have, if we have time to go forward. So thank you for that, and let's get started. Let's start first with Vanessa. We know that a good majority of the audience here are within HR, and employees at work. So the question that I have for you is, how do you see the role of HR and talent evolve in the future workplace?
Yeah. Well, hi everybody. So where I think we hear a lot of buzz is two things. One, there's new technology for our departments to be using. And on the other side, there's a lot of overwhelm with how much technology we're using every day. So sometimes we're seeing a lot of trying to solve problems by throwing technology at it. Well, I think that problem will continue. We're always going to have more technology coming out and being thrown at us. And where I see our role being really effective and what we can be a catalyst for in our organizations is understanding what's the problems we're really solving before we start throwing solutions at it. And technology so much is a solution that has given us a lot of empowerment of what we can do to leverage the information we're capturing about humans, about people. So I think the other part is we're going to see a greater appreciation for not just quantifiable data, so numbers, but actually qualitative data and qualitative research that we capture from conversations, from doing research and focus groups, from sitting down and having one-on-ones and empathy interviews where we're connecting with people and capturing their stories as valid data, not just what box they ticked on an engagement survey and what percentage of this employee base feels a certain way. So I think whenever we see an overemphasis in one area where we're seeing a lot of technology and a lot of focus on AI and machine learning and robots, we're unbalanced, and human nature, all of nature actually, is an interest to balance out. And so that's where we're seeing trying to level us out by focusing on human skills. They're not soft skills, so we can just remove that term altogether. But human skills of empathy, listening, vulnerability. And so one of the things that I was really pleased to see in the World Economic Forum, they did the most important skills for 2020. And the top one was creative problem solving. Complex problem solving. And so that might sound a lot of data embedded in that, but if we break it down, how do you solve complex problems? Well, it's done with people through listening skills, through asking good questions, through understanding needs. These are deeply embedded human skills that I think we'll see technology helping us to be better at, and also being able to validate that we can't have all of this machine learning and data analytics without actually balancing it out with those human skills. So that's what I see already happening, and I think we'll only see more of that.
That is so beautifully depicted. So I thank you for sharing. And you touched a bit, because this could be a rising concern. So I'm curious if you have any more insight to expand on this. What kind of opportunities do you see HR leaders having to ensure that they have job security in the future workplace? How do you see, what specific opportunities do you see them falling into what you just shared?
Yeah, so I think when there's some mixed messages that we're getting right now, where it's, bring your full self to work and do what you're best at, and find what your special superpower is, and do that as often as you can. And then for a lot of us who are working in people operations, talent, we didn't go into those roles because we love data analytics and sending surveys and analyzing quantifiable metrics. That's not what I get out of bed for. And so I think we're being encouraged to learn these skills, which are valuable, but don't forget what you're innately good at. And so if you're listening and you're working in that space, double down on what you're really good at and advocate for the human skills that you naturally bring. When I talk with my community members about what they feel naturally innately good at, they talk about listening skills, naturally empathetic, understanding people's needs before they even realize it. So some of that intuitive gut checking, which we said, don't make gut decisions, make data decisions. But those are both data insights that we can use. And especially when we look at diversity conversations and creating more equitable environments, we really need empathetic leaders. We need people who ask good questions that evoke storytelling and get people to open up and share authentically. And you just cannot do that with a robot. And so I think with creating job security, it's not forgetting what you're naturally good at, and it's actually becoming your own best advocate and ally for what you're great at. And if you have great human skills and that is naturally to you, we need those leaders now more than ever to really show up vulnerably at work and help us lead the way, because it's definitely, the time is now. So
Thank you. I'm going to take the question to John. John, what HR practices do you believe need to change today to help us prepare for the future of work? And what would you recommend we do to replace them?
Thank you. So I think that follows on quite nicely from Vanessa's comments, actually, because I do agree. Well, firstly, I agree about the need to set objectives, and I've been, doing that for a long, long time, just focusing on everything that we do, being really, really clear what we're trying to achieve. I don't think HR is always that clear. And increasingly, because the workplace is becoming more human, I think the traditional focus on business objectives also need to be supplemented with our understanding of employee expectations and what people are after in the workplace as well. So for me, the objectives are those two things. How do we build a workplace that delivers a business? How do we build a workplace that creates a compelling environment where people can do their best work? So for me, what we need to do in HR follows on from that. So firstly, increasingly, HR needs to be best fit. And I'm going to struggle to focus on any particular process, because actually, I don't believe that any generic process is necessarily right or is necessarily wrong. The issue to me is that we shouldn't be doing generic stuff. We should be focusing on specific processes and activities that are going to meet those particular objectives for our own organization. So we need to be thinking much more about best fit rather than best practice. And then the second thing linked to that is that we should be trying, and this is such, I'm so passionate about this. We should be really focusing on building, but it's creating people-centric businesses where that means something. It's not just sort of a nice term that we're trying to make people feel happier because, we talk about being people-centered. There is a role, there is an opportunity, there is an increasing need to put people at the center of business and build people-based business strategy. So looking at how we can, the opportunities to create engagement or increase people's propensity to collaborate or develop a particular skill in the business, which is going to provide a competitive success, or in the public and voluntary sector will help us transform our organizations of the future. Traditionally, HR's focused on helping, supporting, aligning with the business. But that's still being a support function. We need to bring strategy into the center of HR as well.
Right.
Now, that doesn't necessarily change the process, but it often there's a tweak, because it's. Let me give you one example. So the way that lots of organizations have moved from post and pray advertising to building external communities in recruitment. Now, a lot of people link that to social media. So it's, social recruiting, talent pipelining, and so on. I did that when I was an HR director 20 years ago, but we called it head farming at the time. We had no good technology to build external communities. And the reason we did it is because we wanted to be a true global employer of choice. And we knew we wouldn't be able to do that through traditional recruitment. Traditional recruitment's a great way to give you average people, but if you really want to compete on people, it's pretty rubbish, because the best people aren't going to be in the market at the time you have a vacancy, and therefore you need to be on somebody else's agenda rather than your own. So the processes are the same. The way we do them changes dramatically because we're putting people as the objective for what we need to achieve.
Right. Mike, you look like you may want to chime in here on that specific topic, because I know you care so much about both people and driving performance, as we all do here. So I'm curious to know what you have to share on that topic as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think, really focusing on the culture piece, right? And how does HR really engage in bringing a culture forward and be influential in that. And again, I do believe it's all about the experience people have. And the opportunity is to get out to the margins and make a difference. So implementing technology, implementing programs that HR has traditionally done and is very important to the operation of the business is not the answer going forward. So it's not putting a different flavor of juice into the pipeline. It is doing different things. And that future that future state is a challenge, because we have to make decisions about what do we stop doing so we can do something new. And I think that becomes a big challenge. There's also a gap in adopting the new language and feeding that to people and not changing the experience. So if I am an employee and I've been out on the margins and I don't feel like I'm being engaged and being touched well by all these programs, and I simply now receive all these beautiful new words that we're using, and empathy and inclusion and belonging, which I hold dear, I believe are the answer to making the change. But if I experience nothing new, those words don't mean anything to me. And so detaching ourselves from current processes and finding a way to actually get out in the margins with the people is the greatest opportunity. And that will change the culture, because it's actually a touch point.
Right.
That's what's most on my mind on that topic.
Right. I can relate. It's, there's all these values that I recall that were set forth, but when there's misalignment or you're not feeling like the company and the people in it are really harnessing and embodying the values, and there's lack of integrity in that, what's the point of even spewing that type of vernacular forward if you're not embodying it? So I'm curious to know and to hear Mary Beth's perspective on this, since this is also deep in the work that you do. So the question that I have for you, more specifically, if you can directly speak to the point of how do values play a role in crafting culture and how the individuals embody that experience?
Yeah, I love this topic. I love everything what everyone said so far, and it's so important to be having these conversations, because I think oftentimes you can feel alone and feel like you're the only one who thinks this way, but there are so many people in this community who do, and so I'm so grateful to be a part of this conversation this morning. But specifically on the values piece, I think oftentimes people have a hard time even defining what is culture. What is culture in general? So people sometimes say it's the way things are done around here, it's the personality of the organization, right? And so there's a lot of ways that people think about it, but I use the formula of values times behavior equals culture. So values are so incredibly critical, but the problem is, or the opportunity is, that oftentimes companies will say they have a specific value, as you were just alluding to, say collaboration or innovation. So they'll have a really nice, beautiful poster on the wall that says these are their values. And then when it comes to their behavior, so thinking about that formula, values times behavior, the behavior is completely disconnected from the poster or the ideal culture that they're looking to create. So if you're saying that you want a culture of innovation and the first step is to create a marketing campaign around that, that's fine. I think that's great to have the collateral that supports what it is that you want to do, but you have to dive into the behaviors, because it can be extraordinarily frustrating for people, particularly folks who are being brought in and hiring people because they believe this is a culture of innovation and collaboration, because they do such a great job of promoting that. But then they come in and the company is siloed and you're not allowed to present new ideas. And particularly for young people in the workplace, a lot of times if they're coming up with new ideas, they're being considered entitled. And so it creates a disconnect between the belief around what they're getting into and then the experience that they're having through folks' behaviors. So when you can have your organization's behaviors in alignment with those values, you're using them both as a compass but also as guardrails. It's an incredible tool for hiring, coaching, and letting people go, because the reality is if folks are not living in alignment with those behaviors, they are not an ideal fit for the company's culture that you want to create. And every single person creates the culture. A lot of people want to say, you know, it's the job of the CEO. Absolutely, it takes leadership to embody those things, and they need to walk the walk first. But every single person creates the environment around them through their behaviors. Culture exists in and outside of work. It's every single place that we go. And so now that I'm like walking, talking, living, breathing values all the time, we all are a set of living values. I can see them in every space through people's behaviors, not because they're telling me that's what they value or their values.
Right. So to clarify one question, would you say that the value set is the filter as to whether one is like one of the primary filters and qualifiers for whether one is a right fit for the company?
I think it can be if done correctly and effectively. Right? Because I think a lot of times there's superficial conversations about it. You care about collaboration. Who's going to say no? Right? Who's going to say, oh, no, I never want to do that. I hate people. Right? So I think that it's when it's used effectively as a filter. So not just having checking the boxes, but going deep into some of the things that other folks have been talking about earlier. Like, how can you have vulnerable, empathetic, authentic conversations so that people can be honest with those pieces? And a lot of times when people are creating the values for their organization, they're using a marketing campaign to do it and looking at what are the buzzwords right now for their sector and their industry, and versus why don't we talk to our people and understand what are their values and then see what is the most common across the board in those values, and how can we use the things that are already intrinsically motivating our folks as the tool to create the culture here, versus, hey, now every single person here needs to care about innovation because it's the hot word for our sector this year.
Oh, I love that you just highlighted that point, that intrinsically motivate the folks within our organization. That is so valid. Love it. Thank you for sharing. We are going to transition to Cheryl, and we're going to cover a topic that we haven't yet spoke of quite yet. So Cheryl, if you can bring us some perspective on how social media and social engagement shapes the modern experience for culture.
Great, thank you. So it's interesting because in my space, I've worked with culture for well over 15 years. And everything that the other panelists talked about with values is something I've seen consistently over the years. And so all of that makes sense. You have to have values. Every company has a culture, whether they intentionally design it or they just let it happen. Values are at the root and the foundation of the culture. So then when I think about the future of work and what's different and where I'm seeing a shift is related to the impact of social. And to your point, it's not just social media when you think about Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, but it's all the digital experiences and how people are engaging digitally, and how is that translating into the expectations that the modern employee has of their work experience, their employee experience, and the culture of the company. And the big shifts I've seen is around what employees expect. And this is not about millennials. This is about everybody, because we're all modern workers, right? We all experience digital transformation in our personal life. So this is the expectation. Now, millennials and Gen Zs, they're going to have a higher expectation because they've known nothing different. But all modern employees have the same experience, and that is an expectation for access. There's a lot of cultural expectation within an organization for employees to have access to anybody in the company, regardless of hierarchy. And that happens in social, that happens in life with Twitter. It happens with Facebook and Instagram, where you can connect with a celebrity or a politician or or an athlete that you want to connect with, and you can actually interact. Now, you may not be interacting with that person, it might be their handler, but you still have the ability to reach out, make a connection. You come into an organization where the access may have been limited before, and it was okay to be limited because there weren't tools and technology to enable it. Now it's not okay. And so how do leaders get their arms around their ability to impact and shape culture, understanding employees want access? The other thing employees want is the ability to connect. It's not enough to connect with the people who sit near you in your department. They actually have a higher expectation to connect with people regardless of location, title, and office that they're sitting in. And the biggest thing is, you think about social, it's about the opinion culture. I want to be able to give my opinion, and I want to be able to have my opinion heard. And that affects every decision. And so I think, to the point that was made earlier about why not ask employees what values they think are important in an organization. Well, historically, it was a little bit harder to get that information. You'd have to do personal focus groups. You have to take people off of their work. And a lot of organizations just felt like that took too long, and it was too time consuming. And now, using technology, you can actually get that information from employees immediately, and you can turn around and show them within a day that I asked your opinion, I heard your opinion, and here's how I'm using it. And so I see that's one of the biggest transformations I've seen when it comes to the impact of how do you shape a culture? And that's been one of my core responsibilities my whole career. How do you architect it and shape it given the changes that are out there today? The final thing I would say is this whole expectation of having a consumer-like cultural experience. You know, if you think about the fact that you can digest any information using YouTube from a consumer perspective, so then you translate that into culture and what expectations people have of the easy and digestible and approachable ways that you can communicate with employees. And I saw someone write in as a comment, it's like, this is interesting, but how do you actually implement any of the stuff that you're talking about? And I think a quick example is we have a restaurant customer, and you think about if anybody's in retail or restaurant, hospitality, any of those sectors, if you have to train a bunch of people on the best practice, so for example, restaurant best practice on food handling, food safety handling, and you look at that and you say, okay, back in the day, and back in the day is not that far ago, you would have a manual, and someone would have to flip through the manual, see pictures of someone demonstrating it. Or even fast forward a little bit, you have to go find a kiosk in the office or the manager's computer, and you may log into a learning management system, and you may have to sit there and watch a class. And that's not how people learn. That's not how I learn. I have an Instapot. I needed to figure out how to boil an egg. I didn't look for a manual. I didn't go take an online class. I went to YouTube, and I took the class that was the shortest and had the most views. So how do you translate that into a employee experience and give them the same ability culturally to get the same access that they would experience in their own consumer life?
Beautiful. A lot of what we're talking about here in terms of being and the employee being a part of creating and shifting the culture, and being able to leverage the digital experience and social media to shape how you engage and experience with your culture, which is ultimately your people, and you know who they are and what beliefs they have. And then this other aspect, which is process and people and performance, all of these intersect. And I really love what Vanessa shared in terms of how AI and these human skills are beginning to come rising at the surface to level each other out. And so much of every component, every piece of what everybody shared here is beginning to converge. And I know that, with companies like, or organizations like Hacking HR, we are part of shaping that conversation. So while we might not have the direct answer to all of this, we are the ones that evolving to shape shift the possibilities and how we work together through these rising tides of human experience and AI converging together. So again, I want to honor that this is why we're having this conversation. And for all of you who have questions, I do want to encourage you to continue to ask your questions in the comments and also post comments. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty where I can't see them, so I do apologize, and I want to recognize that. But we will be going back, and individuals will be answering that specific your questions specifically, or you can message any one of the folks here directly. So let's talk a little bit about the definition of culture. And I want to get into the head of John a little bit here regarding his perspective on redefining the term culture. I know that that was a conversation that you and I brought up online together. And I want to hear your perspective on that a little bit.
Sure. I simply made that point because obviously this session is focusing on culture. And although I said in my introduction that everything I do is about culture development, I tend not to use the word or use the term. I think probably all the panelists, I've been working around culture for a long, long time. When I first came across the term, which was 30 years ago, I found it really very, very useful. And I was doing quite a lot of organizational work back then, and culture seemed to offer us something to grasp what was really important in organizations, which we didn't have access to before the term. So I think possibly it's partly because the term now gets so overabused and abused and misused and means so many different things to different people. For that reason, I increasingly find it less useful. But also I think whatever culture is, it is becoming more important. We've all been talking about the fact that the workplace is becoming more human. I love I think social media, I agree, is hugely important. Although I think to me, the shift is bigger than that as well. It is around this shift to become more social and have deeper connections and relationships to meet our own needs and to get work done better. Again, I also agree AI is really important to that, and that, because AI is going to be able to do so much else, I think that means our relationships with each other are increasingly a differentiating factor in workplaces. So all of that means that culture is more and more important. And I'm not against, values and behaviour. Fine. I'd much rather, if a client talks to me about culture, I'll just ask them what they mean by it. And if they mean by values and behavior, great, we can talk about that. If they mean the assumptions or the principles or the paraphernalia around the office or whatever, we can deal with that as well. I just find the term is starting to be a hindrance rather than an enabler. And certainly in terms of the theme of this whole conference, in terms of disruption and hacking, if I was wanting to hack something about culture, that would be it. I'd just get rid of the term. I think it gets in the way. Let's focus on what we really mean and either work on the different constituent elements of culture, or, if it's that emergent collective aspect that all of those things focus on, great, but let's sort of understand that that's what we mean as well.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to do a quick roundtable, and I want to ensure that people who are tuning in today have clear, actionable, recommended items that they can take away from what we're sharing today. So the question I'm going to ask for everyone here is to recommend a specific tip, tool, or action item that one tuning in can experiment with to help this conversation go forward in what we can do today to impact the future of work. Vanessa, if you may start in leading us in your one recommended takeaway and action item.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing I would offer is to get uncomfortable. So put yourself in environments and situations where you're outside of your comfort zone and So I have a couple of recommendations. It doesn't escape me here this morning that we're a group of white folks talking about the future of work, and I feel a little bad about that myself. And that, there's a conversation that we're having here, but we're just one biased perspective. There's a lot of other conversations that we need to be tuning into. And so one of my first recommendations would go to events that you maybe don't necessarily immediately identify with the attendees or participants, right? So there's one here in the Bay Area called Afrotech, which is really inspirational. There's a huge movement with lesbians who tech, really amazing speakers. I'd also tune in on your podcasts. One of the ones I love listening to about the LGBT life experience is called Nancy Podcast. They have a really great series called Out at Work. And just I'll leave one tip for a great tech tool to check out that uses machine learning with understanding how to take away bias in our job descriptions and in our language that we're utilizing. And so they're called Textio, and basically they can help you understand your company culture of what you're not aware of, that biased, we think we're one thing, but we use words that say another thing, and then also how to communicate effectively so you open up your applicant pool to people with a wider range of life experience through addressing bias. So they're really combining an empathy-based approach using machine learning, really powerful tool. So those are my three. Thank you so much.
Who is next on my panel here? Okay, I'll go with in order. John.
I'd just go back to some of the initial points we made about having a clear objective. To me, it all begins with that. And setting the objective, I guess, is becoming more complex. So we do need to be focused on the business. We need to understand the organisation we're in. We need to be in touch with our employees. Somebody mentioned design thinking briefly before. I think that's a great approach to get greater clarity on what workforce expectations are. We do need to understand where digital technology is going and the opportunities that provides as well. And it's having that broader context about what the possibilities are and what our organization needs, and then thinking about sort of how things can be different. And one of the things I quite often do is sort of go through, and again, this is sort of design thinking, is to go through a series of divergent and convergent thinking processes. So first, to avoid going straight to a solution, this is what we want the culture or whatever it may be to be in the future. But here are some options. These are all the different things we could do. These are the types of organizations which might be useful for us. And then the power of the objectives is we're then able to compare those different objectives, those possibilities, against the objectives and select which one to do. To me, that's probably more than anything else the most useful way of developing a strategic approach within this area.
Thank you. Really great contributions so far. Who's next? Cheryl.
So I have three things I would suggest. So I think the first one is starting with asking yourself as the business leader or HR professional, why am I doing this practice the way I'm doing it? So a lot of us learn certain ways to do values practices, performance reviews, employee engagement, whatever those initiatives are that you're responsible for driving within your organization that has an impact on the employee experience and culture, is just take a step back and ask, like, why is this the process I'm doing? For example, performance reviews. Why do we all do one performance review for those who do, as opposed to customizing the performance process based on the business unit and what their needs are? So starting with the why. The second thing I would say is take out as much friction as possible for the employee. So look at the steps that you're putting in place, and how can you remove friction and make it as easy as possible for the employee and the employee experience, for the employee to bring their best self to work. And then the final thing is advocating for the employee voice. I heard some of these messages earlier today, but it's talking about how to let the employee actually co-create their employee experience. So as opposed to HR practitioners and culture experts and business leaders coming in and deciding what the process is going to be and what the practice is going to be and what the values are going to be, absent the employee voice and the employee co-creation. So figure out, how can I integrate the employee into it? Because ultimately you're designing something that you need them to either uphold or you need them to engage in. So why not have them actually help co-create?
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Mike.
So I'm going to push a little bit. I think that to really move forward and make a difference, I would encourage people.
Hi everyone, this is Romy Newman from Fairy God Boss. Welcome. I'm going to just give a few minutes to let everybody join in since it's just 11:30.
It was me. I apologize.
That was nice of Fairy joined us. No, to be clear, when we look at this group together and we look at what's happening inside Hacking HR and Claude and the people that engaged yesterday, those are the voices. These are the people that will bring you into the future. And part of making a change, part of embracing what's ahead of us, the first thing I would encourage is stop listening to the voices that brought us to this point. And I can call them out. There's college professors that we have been following for a long time. There are organizations that have positioned themselves as the control mechanism for HR. And they brought us to this point. I don't think they have the future view. What I've heard from all of the people here, Cheryl, Vanessa, John, Mary Beth, are the answers going forward. And it's not bringing the engine of the past into the future. That will derail where we're going. And so let go of the old voices and embrace the new. The other thing I will say is when we use words like fit, that is diametrically opposed to diversity and inclusion. So the old boys club is a fit, and I think we're trying to change that. So the language we use, fit, we have to be careful of. Fit needs to go away. Best practice is the closed door to innovation because we use that as a hammer. No, we have a best practice, that idea is not good. So be careful about best practices are the thing that needs to change so we can innovate. Fit is the most exclusive word and concept that we can put into an organization. And the old voices that brought us here are not the voices that will bring us into the future. So embrace this group, these voices, because what I heard today certainly is great advice and will help you.
Thank you for your perspective, Mike. And I am just curious because I too, and I think everybody here on this call, I've heard before in our pre-call, like words we use are so important. We know that. And I'm just curious to know what words you would suggest we replace with the word fit, like, or what type of expression would it replace that word that's very commonly used?
Yeah, instead of fit, I would say contribution. Mm-hmm. So culture contribution, right? Bring new people in, new voices. Culture impact. So impact, contribution would be two words that I would look to replace that particular one. Best practices, I would look at best possibilities. Where can we go? Not how do we do it?
Right. I love that. That embraces the expansive mindset, which is for growth and contribution, and allows us to see our potential and how we can continue to grow and rise up to new levels that we would have never even saw for ourselves because of the words we often use to keep ourselves thinking in a box. So I thank you for that. Who has yet to share their actionable? Mary Beth.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a slightly different approach, and and I'd like to give some actionable tips for people who are not in a position where they feel like they are a culture catalyst or someone who gets to bring in a consultant or work with an organization to make any kinds of shifts to the culture. I often find that one of the most toxic ways to create an environment is for people to be gathering in private corners and all festering around a wound. So oftentimes, if something isn't going well, whether it's behaviors or the way a project's being implemented or whatever, what we do as individuals is we go and talk to our friends at work or the people that we trust, and we complain and we go on and on and on about all the things that are wrong. And so it starts to create this heightened sense of intensity around how bad things are. What I almost never hear is when people are in a situation right like that and they say, and then I talked to them directly about it, and we were able to have a dialogue about what we could do differently to create a different type of environment. So I think so often as individuals, particularly if we don't feel like we're in a position of quote unquote power within the company, we think, oh, well, all I can do is complain about the situation or vent. I shouldn't even say complain, vent, because you need to get it out of your system, right? It lodges you oftentimes because it feels so intense and it can be so overwhelming. I mean, I've come from personally worked in toxic workplace where I would get literally ill from the environment and the experiences I was having with others, and was totally guilty of being the person who would call up my friend at work and just talk about how bad things were. But very rarely was I going to my supervisor and saying, what can we do differently about this? This is how it's making me feel. This is what's happening to me as an individual as a result of these behaviors. And so what I would encourage people to do is similar to what Vanessa's been saying, right? Like, how can you be vulnerable and use it from a place of courage to start a conversation? Now, recognizing that it's not going to be just because you're vulnerable doesn't mean people are going to meet you with empathy. So that can be a very scary place to feel like you're putting yourself out there. But I can tell you it's so much healthier for you as the individual than going back into a private space and just fueling the negativity amongst each other. So if you are able to say, I need to talk to people about what we can do differently, and hey, I have some ideas of what can be done to make these shifts, or even if it's, I don't have the ideas, but I'd like to have a conversation where we can get together and start talking about these shifts. A lot of times that happens when people get really clear on what is it that they would like to experience in the workplace, and then they can use that as their own compass of, what is it that other people want to experience? Is it similar to mine? And if so, what can we collaborate on to start to make positive shifts? It does not have to be a culture overhaul, or you don't have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to bring somebody in to make these shifts. It can start by just having conversations openly and doing it from a place of love and not from a place of fear. Right. So when we go and we just go on and on and on about what's wrong, we're not giving the space for what the opportunity is and what can be shifted to do what's right. I would also recommend that if you do raise your hand and you do have those conversations and nothing changes, for your own well-being, go. Right? Don't stick around into an environment where a culture is sucking the life out of you. You only have this one life. And if you are willing to use your voice to try to make change, if you can't do that, it's time to exit, because it's not worth your well-being to be stuck somewhere where you are literally suffering as a result of the environment.
Right. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that I forgot to bring forward aside from myself with actionable items? Okay, because I can only see, okay, here we go. So I will expand and also bring forward a little bit of my one actionable item as well. And it really is dovetails off of Mary Beth's perspective as well. And for me, having that awareness that most of corporation and how we've operated things in the past really are, from a leadership and energy perspective, it's within constricted and constraint of thought, right? And if we believe that everything comes from what we believe and belief then dictates the thought, which then dictates the action and the experience that we create. We have to start with acknowledging our thought processes and acknowledging that the old ways were constricted and constrictive in our thought. So if we could focus on this expansive thought of possibility and opportunities and realize that that is what will diminish the fear mindset that many of us live in, and you can see yourself beyond just the confines of the corporation and as an honorable human being who has the potential to shift and create change and be a part of that change through you recognizing that you are expansive in your possibility. You will be part of contributing to these cultural shifts and the future of work and this conversation that we are ensuing upon today. So I thank you all for contributing that and recognize that you all are part of that shift. And it really starts with honoring and being of integrity to your own potential and possibilities within the future for yourself and the present and how you go forward today and in the future of work. So next up, thank you everybody. Thank you our panelists, and thank you Enrique for facilitating behind the scenes. I also want to thank all of you who were able to comment and contribute your questions. I do apologize once again for being a little bit limited in my ability to view it without things echoing in the background. So we will be following up and responding to many of your comments and questions in the posts for those of you who have commented. Thank you. And then next up, we have the Fireside Chat at 10 o'clock, and that's going to go on to 11:45, where we're going to be discussing employee experience with Ben Witter and Connie, and it's moderated by Josia. Oh, I apologize if I didn't get the names right, but tune into that. That's going to be at 10, and thank you all for tuning in today. Thanks again to our panelists.
Cheers.